Lorna had entered the cathedral grounds under the auspices of attending evensong, though she had little intention of actually doing so. Students were allowed in anyway, but after a certain hour, a service was the only way to gain entry. She longed to stand below the grand stained glass windows where the angled light would congregate, but a brisk walk in the grounds would have to suffice. I ought to have come straight here when I arrived, she thought. It got dark so early this time of year. Shadows lurked in her wake. Lorna could feel the frost in her lungs, and she shivered as the icy spectre of her breath rose before her. The chanting of psalms and canticles flowed through the cloisters as she bore the bracing cold. The air was full of ghosts, the missed opportunities of another dying year, and she was still being haunted. "Why didn't you tell me you were spending Christmas on your own?" she had asked her housemate Jack. "I thought you were going back to New Zealand. You could have come and stayed with us." "I think I'd feel like a bit of an interloper," he'd said. Sometimes it was hard to get a whisper out of Jack. The old house had felt dismal while he haunted it alone. They had banished the gathering gloom together with a fire in the hearth. "What I really wish," thought Lorna, "is that I'd stayed here with you." It would have been easier with just the two of them. Going home might have been a mistake, but what was Christmas without a few family arguments? What was to be expected when scattered seeds found themselves in each other's pockets? People can be wrong as often as they're right. Lorna's father watched the news, read the news, and every hour even turned on the radio to hear the news. It was never good news, and he argued about it with anyone who wouldn't listen. War, politics, climate change, disease, all overwhelming and numbing. A mother and child had made the headlines, washed up on a Mediterranean beach. They weren't the first. Lorna's father had looked at his wife, his daughters, his sisters, and his assembled nieces, nephews and in-laws, and decided that this vignette of desperation and cruelty was the appalling proof that the world was no good and mankind was beyond redemption. She wasn't sure why it affected her so much. Lorna was no saint. She lived by the grace of her parents and her loans, and had passed enough of the dispossessed on the street to enter a pub and buy another glass of overpriced wine. Yet the shadow had risen. She needed a distraction. Lorna had disappeared soon after that, moaning about having too much work to do, and dropped in on her unsuspecting housemate. "Let's call around and see who's about," she had said to Jack. "If Christmas is for family, then New Year is for friends." They weren't planning anything extravagant. Perhaps a game or a film to pass the time, and then Big Ben and the fireworks on TV at midnight. There would be plenty to drink, but they weren't 18 anymore. People had started to arrive. Conversation came easily enough, but soon she had to escape again. She would come back after some fresh air, ready to take on the world. The spectacular lights of the cathedral were a beacon against the night. Lorna kept to the shadows as she strode through iron gates and down dark passageways devoid of life. After the chaos of the season, the cathedral slept through the irreligious observance of the new year. Somewhere in the grounds, Lorna found herself below the crumbling arches of an ancient chapel, now empty and open to the eternal sky. She stopped dead, and the thing that followed her stopped too. The dark night grew darker and the cold air grew colder. The shadows took shape as she turned, the darkness congealing into a familiar form, a grim reflection of herself with her own eyes and her own hollow features, wearing a ragged imitation of her dress. Lorna steadied herself on a column, the stones cold beneath her ungloved hand, as the two looked upon each other. "It has been a while," she said. "Not so long," replied the other. "Yet you follow me still," said Lorna. I am here for you. I am always with you. What do you want? You hold great sadness in your heart, it said, with Lorna's own cold lips. Great sadness and a wounded soul. Would you not forget them and find release? Follow me, and I can help you. Lorna was used to being haunted. This terrible companion endured at the edge of her awareness. She was visited in the stillness of the night when this vision of herself in the pall of death would hold a silent vigil standing over her. Sometimes it drew closer, and she would curl up and close her eyes, hearing the creak of the mattress, sensing the weight as it sat on her bed, feeling the strange tension in her chest. Not tonight, said Lorna. Not tonight. The choir swelled and stopped. The music ended. Their eyes met, and Lorna was caught in those steely mirrors. The apparition turned and moved away, tempting her towards the towering Gothic edifice of the cathedral. Now Lorna was the one who followed, the frozen grass crunching underfoot. She moved against the dismissed congregation and crossed the richly decorated threshold as the bells above rang out the hour. She passed the thick walls and the heavy oak doors and stepped into the nave where the vaulted ceiling soared high above, grand and beautiful as ever. She was surrounded by England in stone. A few people lingered in prayer, but they paid her no mind as she climbed the pilgrim steps and crept through the choir. She searched, but the spirit that had stolen her face seemed to have dissipated. She found a secluded seat and rubbed her numb hands together. A man was sitting further down from her, with a child of 9 or 10 years sleeping against him. He smiled when he saw her looking over at them. He couldn't have been much older than Lorna, although his face was tired and weather-beaten. Looking for someone? He said, and then, by way of explanation, I saw you walking around after everyone had left. Not unless you happened to see someone else who looks a lot like me, said Lorna. Apart from yourself? No, I'm afraid not. Your sister? Something like that. Though her soul ached, she returned his smile, but soon looked away. Over the man's shoulder, she saw again the dreadful form of her doppelganger. The other Lorna's hand was on a small wooden door in the wall of the transept. The dared fingers beckoned, pushed the door open, and slipped inside. Lorna left the man and child and followed through the low archway. She stumbled at the first step and then, with more care, fell blindly into the darkness, climbing her way along the cold stones. Lorna felt her ghost's wispy hair in every cobweb that brushed her face. Imagined those dared fingers in every misshapen stone she grasped. Moonlight filtered down in fragments to illuminate the narrow stairs that wrapped around the tower. She reached the belfry, where the silent shapes of the bells loomed overhead and the chill wind whipped through the open arches. Lorna looked across the room to the exposed workings of the cathedral clock, keeping the hour in cogs and brass. Hello? She said, and then, hearing no reply, shouted again, Hello! A ladder led to the beams above, and Lorna climbed higher still. At last, she stood alone in the tower and called out, Where are you? You said you would help me. Her words echoed around the chamber, and the bells trembled in their deep tones. The greatest of the bells, Old Dunstan, shimmered in the moonlight, and from its depths stepped forth a tall figure with translucent skin the colour of bronze. Lorna stepped back, almost losing her footing on the beams. What she saw was not the spirit she sought, but an aged man dressed in the robes of an archbishop. He spoke, and his cavernous voice resonated in the night air. Watch and listen as the hour ascends. With a whirring and clicking, the Victorian clock mechanism that had kept steady time for over 100 years sprang to life and spun, faster and faster, the hands counting the hours until they reached midnight. The chimes began to sound aloud, and for every bell that rang out, another awakened spirit appeared, filling the belfry with the assembled ghosts of 1,000 years, older than the clock, older than the tower, hanging in the air and surrounding her, close enough to touch with their spectral caress of cold metal. Dressed like monks and pilgrims in cowls and robes, each drew back their hood to reveal the faces of men and women, some older, some younger, some beautiful, some terrible, each a reflection of the bell from whence they came. Lorna closed her eyes and clasped her hands over her ears against the cacophony that lasted an age. Finally, old Dunstan himself counted out the hour of 12. His ears were still ringing when Dunstan spoke again. Her ears. To what do we owe this intrusion? I was led here by the thing that haunts me, said Lorna. Indeed? Then look below you. Look! Look! Cried the others. In the centre of the tower was an open trapdoor, used for raising and lowering the bells. Lorna opened her eyes and crept to the edge. She peered down and the tower fell away from her. Down the storing vaults and columns to where her own broken form lay on the floor far below. She backed away. What? I slipped and fell? No, that's not me. Lorna did not know what to believe. Was she seeing herself? Or the spirit that had taken her image? Were they one and the same? It appears you were led here for a reason, said Dunstan. Am I dead? She asked. Perhaps. In the keeping of time we see many deaths. What are you? What have you done to me? We have done nothing more than reflect your torment. Your own sorrow has brought you here. Behold! Behold! Echoed the other bells. The crowd parted, revealing one of the belfry's open arches. Lorna looked through the windowless portal, expecting to see the city spread out beneath her, but instead she saw a high bridge above a raging river. A woman stood at the perilous edge, thin clothes flapping around her. At first, Lorna thought she was seeing herself again, or else her ghost, but this woman was older and thinner. Who is she? Your ancestor, on a winter's night when our clock was young, but our bells were already old, said Dunstan. Lorna found herself standing beside the woman on the bridge. There was a bundle in the woman's arms, and Lorna realised that it was a baby, swaddled in old-fashioned linens. The woman looked down at the infant, and then turned its face towards her chest to shield it from the cold. Her eyes held a desperate determination as she stared out from the bridge. Hypnotised by the churning waters, she ceased to see the world around her. Lorna's words caught in her mouth as she tried to speak. She's not going to jump. Dunstan hung in the air, untroubled by the wild winds. Lorna rushed forward and reached for the woman's dress, but her ethereal fingers wound around nothing. She shouted as loud as she could. The woman broke her gaze and looked around as though hearing a whisper on the wind. She stared right through Lorna, but perhaps she heard her across the years, for she stepped back from the edge and ran away into the night. Lorna sighed with relief. She didn't do it. Well done. She was there for love, and thus you have her to thank for your own existence, just as she now has you to thank for hers. Now they were on a hill, outside a crumbling city, in a place where the air was harsh and dry. The hill was bisected by a chain-link fence that stretched on and on, out of sight in both directions. A small girl gripped that fence with both hands and gazed out across the dusty landscape, past where Lorna stood, invisible on the other side. Beyond the horizon lay home. A young man climbed the hill behind her and placed his hands on her shoulders. The girl did not want to look away, but she did, and buried her face in the man's clothes, seeking comfort in her only relative. They faded into black mist, which soon cleared to reveal the belfry with the ghosts pressing in and muttering in sonorous tones. Lorna prostrated herself before them and cried out, "What does it mean?" "There is darkness gathering around your soul," said Dunstan. "You are trapped between the cruelty you see in the world and the cruelty you find in yourself." "My own cruelty? What can I do against that?" "You cannot make yourself so unhappy that it will make another person happy. You cannot suffer enough to take away all the suffering of the world. You prey only upon yourself. Life can be terrible, but it could be so much worse. Surely that is the natural reaction to an insane world." "The world has always been both good and evil, and always will be. By dwelling on the evil, you help hold it in place. You blame others for not giving you what you deserve or taking more than they deserve, and so you too become cruel." "I would stop if I could," said Lorna. "Generations have thought the same. You are here tonight because you have more power than you realize." "What power do I have?" she cried. "Nothing." "You have the power to participate in life. Concentrate only on what you can control. There is good in the world. Think on that or else be dragged down. Look for it everywhere you can. You will find it. You can make a difference." "I don't know if I can." "All you can do," said the bells, "is do what you can." With that, the bells rang a final peal and their spirits retreated into their shadowy depths. When old Dunstan the great bell rang, he counted out the hour of 9. Lorna's ears were ringing again, but she was alone and the belfry was silent. "Only 9 o'clock, she thought. "Not midnight. It's not too late." She hurtled down the staircase at speed and almost crashed into someone coming up to meet her. It was Jack. "I came to find you," he said. "We were worried about you. You were gone so long. Then I remembered how much you like to come here, to the Cathedral." They went back into the nave together. The man and the child Lorna had seen earlier were now standing outside the entrance to the belfry stairs. "Omar here told me that he saw you coming here," said Jack. "They told me they were closing," said Omar, "and I didn't want you to get locked inside. Your friend came looking for you." The small girl was awake now. She opened her eyes and looked in awe at the cathedral as though she was seeing it for the first time. The man spoke a few quiet words to her, and Lorna realised they were the two she had seen in her vision of the city. "Is she your sister?" asked Lorna. "She is the child of my sister," said Omar. "Your niece," she said. The man nodded. "Her name is Ayla. You're students here?" he asked. Lorna and Jack said that they were. "I studied in Canterbury for a year," said Omar. "It was not so long ago, but now it feels that way." "Is it nice to be back?" asked Jack. "It is strange. I know nobody anymore. An old friend of my mother's lives here somewhere. She came because we always spoke so highly of the place. We have not found her yet." Omar's tone made Lorna feel uneasy, and as she looked a little closer, she saw how his clothes were dusty and worn from travel. "Are you staying somewhere tonight?" she asked. "We may be able to stay here," said Omar. "In the cathedral? Aren't they closing?" "Churches, cathedrals, they can be surprisingly accommodating, or so we have found, haven't we, Ayla? He squeezed his niece's shoulder lightly and smiled, even though I've never been very religious. Lorna took Jack aside and whispered something to him. Jack thought for a moment and then nodded. Come and stay with us, he said. We've got a big old house and 2 of our housemates are still away this week. There's plenty of room. If we can do one small thing tonight, thought Lorna, perhaps the year won't have been a waste. They walked back through streets which were filling up with wassailing revellers, and Lorna let them into the old house. Marie, one of their other friends who lived in Canterbury over the holidays, came into the hall to see who it was, and her face lit up at the sight of them. Lorna, she said, we missed you. I hope you still have that fire going. It's freezing outside. We do indeed, she called back down the corridor. Lorna's back. Let's get the kettle on and have a cup of tea, said Jack. They moved into the living room to join the other guests, and Lorna introduced her new companions. Isla, why don't you go and warm yourself up by the fire, said Lorna. Food and drink were soon passed around, and the newcomers shared in the celebration of the new year. Omar told them his story. Big Ben chimed in London, and the Cathedral chimed in Canterbury. As the guests started to leave, Marie spoke up. Omar, what was the name of your mother's friend? The one you said lives here in Canterbury? Mrs. Amari, said Omar. I was thinking, and I'm pretty sure that Mrs. Amari lives on our street. I think my mum knows her. There's no way that's the same person, said Jack. What are the chances? Well, you never know, said Lorna. It's worth a shot. I'll get her number from my mum and send it over to Lorna tomorrow morning, said Marie. Well, later today, I suppose. Happy New Year! On the first frosty morning of the new year, Lorna awoke to a phone call from her father. Happy New Year, pet, he said. I'm sorry about what I said over Christmas. You know we miss you while you're away. I miss you too, Dad, she said, but it was all too much for me. I know I go on sometimes. Your mother and I have had a word. I need to step back a little. Maybe I don't always need to be in the loop if it affects me so much. Life can be terrible, but it could be so much worse. Well, you don't want to be completely uninformed. No. But perhaps I've got to insulate myself if I want to keep my sanity. I'm still working out how. All you can do, said Lorna, is do what you can. Aye, that I will. I understand if you want to stay down there now, but we can come and visit in a few weeks. I've always wanted to see that cathedral. It was a new year of new possibilities. Lorna realised she hadn't made any kind of resolutions. The first thing she would do was talk more with her friends and family. That was a start. She would always want things she couldn't have and think about things she couldn't change, but she no longer felt like she was split in two. All over the city, the bells rang in the New Year's morning in polite disagreement. The end.